On April 15, 1945, with the Second World War grinding to its bloody end, the first British soldiers approached the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. A few days earlier, a truce had been arranged. German officers warned them to expect a typhus outbreak inside, but no warning could ever prepare them for the reality. They walked into a world where the living were almost impossible to tell from the dead, a silent kingdom of skeletons and decay. Some 13,000 corpses lay unburied, rotting in the spring sun. 60,000 more prisoners, skeletal from starvation and ravaged by disease, were waiting for death in huts swimming in filth. And in the middle of this landscape of absolute horror, the camp's commandant, SS Hauptsturmführer Josef Kramer, didn't try to run. He didn't hide. The man the prisoners called the Beast of Belsen put on his clean uniform, stood his ground, and simply waited. When the British arrived, he didn't cower. He didn't deny his role in the nightmare he had created. Instead, with a chilling arrogance that stunned his captors, he decided to join them. He walked them through the piles of bodies, pointed out the mass graves, and casually guided them through the carnage he had commanded. One British soldier, looking at the shackled, unrepentant man, wrote simply, "He will surely be tried as a war criminal." This is the story of that man, of the hell he built, and the cold, remorseless tour he gave at the end of his world. So where does a man like this come from? Was he born a monster? Josef Kramer entered the world on November 10, 1906, in Munich, the only child of a middle-class family. He was raised as a strict Roman Catholic, and his early life was completely unremarkable. He went to school, started an apprenticeship as an electrician, and worked odd jobs as an accountant. But from 1925 to 1933, he was mostly unemployed, just another young man adrift in the chaos of Weimar Germany. And like so many others of his generation, Kramer found a dark sense of purpose in extremism. In 1931, he joined the Nazi Party, and a year later, the SS. For a man going nowhere, the black uniform of the Schutzstaffel offered a career, stability, and a feeling of power. His SS training took him straight into the new and growing concentration camp system, a secret universe hidden from the rest of the world. His first job in 1934 was at Dachau, the Nazis' original camp, the blueprint for all the horrors that would follow. Here, Kramer learned the brutal trade of a camp guard. He learned how to dehumanize people, how to use terror as a tool, and how to see human beings as nothing more than numbers to be managed. And he was a fast learner. His superiors saw him as reliable and loyal to the ideology. He was promoted quickly. From Dachau, he moved to senior jobs at the Sachsenhausen and Mauthausen concentration camps, each post taking him one step deeper into the machinery of Nazi terror. By the time the war started, he wasn't just a guard anymore. He was an administrator of atrocity. In 1940, he became the assistant to Rudolf Höss, the commandant of a new camp in occupied Poland, a place that would become the epicenter of the Holocaust, Auschwitz. Kramer was there from the very beginning, helping Höss inspect the site and plan its deadly expansion. He was learning from the master. While Josef Kramer's name would forever be tied to Bergen-Belsen, it was at other, lesser-known camps that he truly perfected the craft of mass murder. In 1941, after proving his loyalty at Auschwitz, he was given his first command, the Natzweiler Struthof camp in the annexed French region of Alsace. It was here that Kramer went from being a brutal administrator to a direct, hands-on killer. His most grotesque act at Natzweiler was for a project cooked up by August Hirt, a professor at the Reich University of Strasbourg. Hirt wanted to create a collection of Jewish skeletons for so-called scientific study. To get the specimens, 87 Jewish prisoners were chosen at Auschwitz and shipped to Natzweiler. As commandant, Kramer personally oversaw the gassing of 80 of these men and women. He wasn't just giving orders from an office. He was there, in the room, as his men administered the poison. He watched them die and prepared their bodies to be sent to Hirt's Institute. This wasn't bureaucratic violence. It was intimate, personal, and profoundly evil. He had shown his superiors that there was no moral line he wouldn't cross, and his merits were noted. This willingness to get his own hands dirty made him the perfect man for his next job. In May 1944, as the final solution reached its most frenzied and horrific peak, Kramer was promoted to Hauptsturmführer, captain, and sent back to the heart of the Nazi extermination program. He was made the commandant of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the main killing center of the entire Auschwitz complex. From May to November of 1944, Josef Kramer was in charge of the most efficient factory of death ever built. His time as commandant happened to coincide with Operation Hearse, the systematic extermination of Hungary's Jewish population. During those months, hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews arrived at Birkenau, and Kramer was the man who made sure the process of their destruction ran like clockwork. The prosecution at his trial would later say he was brought to Auschwitz specifically to manage the gassings. Survivors' testimonies paint a chilling picture of his rule. He wasn't some bureaucrat hiding in an office. He was a constant, menacing presence on the selection ramp, the platform where arriving trains were divided. It's where SS doctors decided who was fit for slave labor and who was sent to die immediately in the gas chambers. But witnesses like Anita Lasker, a cellist in the Women's Orchestra of Auschwitz, testified that Kramer took an active, violent part in these selections. He was seen beating people with a stick, sometimes to death, and personally forcing the terrified victims onto the trucks headed for the crematoria. Even his own SS subordinates called him a harsh and unforgiving boss. One SS doctor on trial after the war claimed he would fake being sick just to avoid assignments from Kramer, whose ruthless devotion to the mechanics of mass murder was terrifying even to other Nazis. Kramer's name became synonymous with the terror of Birkenau. He had reached the top of his SS career, ruling over an empire of gas chambers and smokestacks. But as the Red Army closed in from the east, the Nazis began dismantling the death camps. The Reich was collapsing, and Kramer was about to get his final command. In December 1944, Kramer was transferred from the industrial killing center of Birkenau to become the new commandant of Bergen-Belsen in northern Germany. Belsen was different. It wasn't built to be a death camp. It had started as a POW camp, and later a holding camp for Jews who might be exchanged for German prisoners held by the Allies. It had no gas chambers. But under Josef Kramer's command, and in the final chaotic months of Nazi Germany, it became something far worse, a slow, agonizing death pit. As other camps in the east were evacuated, tens of thousands of prisoners were force-marched or shoved into cattle cars and just dumped at Belsen. The camp's population exploded. A facility meant for about 15,000 inmates quadrupled in just a few months. By the time of liberation, the number had swelled to 60,000. The camp's infrastructure, which was already poor, completely collapsed. Kramer presided over this spiral into chaos. At his trial, he would claim he begged his bosses in Berlin for help, for more resources, but whether he cared or not, his pleas were ignored. The result was a catastrophe. A typhus epidemic ripped through the camp, so severe that Kramer himself reported that by March 1945, 250 to 300 prisoners were dying every single day. The water supply failed, food all but stopped, with the only ration being a watery soup made from rotting turnips. Huts designed for 100 people were now crammed with 600 or 700, with the dead and the dying lying side by side on lice-infested bunks. Piles of naked, skeletal corpses were just left to rot all over the camp. In the final weeks, any sense of order was gone. Guards ran off, roll calls stopped, and the inmates were left to die. There were rumors of cannibalism. Rats, grown fat and bold, would attack the living who were too weak to fight back. This was Josef Kramer's kingdom of hell. And as the sound of Allied artillery grew louder, he made no move to leave. On the afternoon of April 15, 1945, a small group of British troops from the 63rd Anti-Tank Regiment drove into the area around Bergen-Belsen. They were the first to officially enter the camp, and while they'd been warned about typhus, they were completely unprepared for what they found. The first thing that hit them was the smell. A sweet, sickly stench of decay that hung over everything, a smell so strong it would cling to their uniforms for weeks. As they drove down the main camp road, they saw the inmates, walking skeletons in rags with hollow eyes, staring at the soldiers with a look of disbelief and total exhaustion. And then they saw the bodies. They were everywhere, heaped in staggering piles outside the barracks, lying in the mud, tangled together in doorways. Inside, every hut was a scene from a nightmare. And in the middle of this apocalypse stood Josef Kramer. He met the British officers in his crisp SS uniform, his boots polished. One officer described him as being full of arrogance, looking like a real thug. He was quickly arrested and put in irons. But then came the moment that would define his legacy. Instead of being shocked into silence, Kramer started to talk. He was the commandant, he said, the only one who knew the camp's layout. And so, as the British began the horrifying task of figuring out what to do, Kramer went with them. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum states he casually guided them through the carnage. He took them on an inspection, pointing out the mass graves and the different sections of the camp, almost like a factory manager showing a visitor around. Picture the scene. Hardened British soldiers, men who had fought their way across Europe, reeling in shock. And walking beside them is the architect of it all, shackled but unbowed, calmly explaining the geography of hell. He showed them the huts packed with the dying. He gestured to the heaps of the dead. It was as if he had no concept of his own guilt, no remorse for the abyss of suffering he had overseen. It was this chilling detachment, this horrifying pride in his work, that burned itself into the memory of the liberators. The Beast of Belsen had given his final ghastly tour. For once, the wheels of justice turned quickly. In September 1945, just 5 months after the liberation, Josef Kramer and 44 of his former staff stood before a British military tribunal in Lüneburg. It became known as the Belsen trial, and it was one of the very first major war crimes trials held by the Allies, starting even before the famous Nuremberg trials. In the dock with Kramer were other infamous figures: Dr. Fritz Klein, the camp doctor who had stood among mass graves and told a horrified British officer he was only doing his duty, and Irma Grazer, a 22-year-old female guard nicknamed the Hyena of Auschwitz. The defendants faced charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity at both Bergen-Belsen and Auschwitz. When the charges were read, Kramer and all the others pleaded not guilty. The trial lasted 54 days. For the first time, the world heard detailed first-hand accounts of the Nazi death machine. The prosecution laid out a devastating case, arguing that every action taken by the camp staff showed a complete disregard for the sanctity of human life, making them all participants in mass murder. The evidence was overwhelming. On September 20th, the court was shown a film shot by the British Army during the liberation. The silent, grainy footage of bulldozers pushing thousands of bodies into mass graves left the courtroom stunned. The judges even visited the camp itself. Most powerfully, over 100 survivors took the stand to bear witness. They spoke of beatings, starvation, and torture. Anita Lasker, the Auschwitz cellist, came face to face with Kramer again, testifying that she had seen him on the ramp at Birkenau, actively taking part in the selections for the gas chamber. When it was his turn to speak, Josef Kramer gave a defense that was a masterclass in denial and self-pity. He tried to paint himself not as a monster, but as a misunderstood soldier simply doing his job, bound by duty and honor. He explained his earlier denial about the gas chambers at Auschwitz. His excuse? He claimed a superior officer had made him give his word of honor never to speak of them. He insisted he only felt free to admit the truth after Hitler and Himmler were dead, the men to whom he had pledged his oath. It was a bizarre claim of misplaced loyalty, as if a promise to mass murderers was more important than basic human morality. Regarding the selections at Auschwitz, he flatly denied taking part. He insisted only the doctors made those decisions. He was just the commandant, he argued, responsible for administration, not for who lived and who died. This was a direct contradiction to the testimony of numerous survivors who had seen him on the ramp with their own eyes. And as for the hell he created at Bergen-Belsen, he blamed everyone but himself. He testified that he sent desperate reports to Berlin, begging for more food and medicine, but his requests were ignored. The catastrophe, he argued, was the fault of the German High Command, not him. He was just a dutiful officer trying to manage an impossible situation. He showed no remorse, no empathy, only a stubborn insistence that he had done nothing wrong. He was, in his mind, only following orders. It was the same excuse used by countless Nazi perpetrators, an excuse the court and the world would find bankrupt. The court deliberated for 6 hours. On November 17, 1945, the verdicts came down. Josef Kramer was found guilty on all charges for his crimes at both Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. The sentence was death. He was one of 11 defendants condemned to be hanged. Even in his final days, his arrogance never left him. He continued to insist he was innocent, just a dutiful soldier wronged by his enemies. But there would be no escape. On the cold morning of December 13, 1945, at Hamelin prison, the sentences were carried out. The man chosen for the job was Britain's most famous executioner, Albert Pierre Point, a professional known for his speed and efficiency. Sometime that day, Josef Kramer, the 39-year-old Beast of Belsen, was led to the gallows. The man who had presided over the deaths of hundreds of thousands, who had personally overseen gassings, who had beaten people on the Auschwitz ramp, and who had guided his captors through the horror of Belsen, now faced his own end. The entire procedure, from the moment he entered the execution chamber to the moment the trapdoor fell, likely took less than a minute. The story of Josef Kramer is a chilling reminder of how ordinary men can become the instruments of extraordinary evil. It's a history we have to keep telling. If you believe these stories are important, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking this video. It helps make sure the lessons of the past are not lost to the future. Josef Kramer's body was buried in an unmarked grave in the prison yard. The camp at Bergen-Belsen was deliberately burned to the ground by British forces to stop the spread of typhus, an attempt to wipe the stain from the earth. But the memory of what happened there and the image of its arrogant commandant giving a tour of his own hell endures. Kramer's defense of just following orders was rejected, setting a vital precedent for post-war justice. Individuals are responsible for their crimes, even inside a criminal system. An order to commit mass murder is not a legal or moral excuse. He wasn't some monster from another world. He was a man who made a series of choices. He chose to join the party, chose to join the SS, chose to embrace an ideology of hate, and chose at every single step to become more and more cruel. His story is a testament to the terrifying depths of human evil, but his trial is a testament to the enduring human demand for justice. In remembering the Beast of Belsen, we don't just remember a monster. We remember that such monsters are made, and it's our eternal responsibility to recognize and stand against the forces that create them.